So what's the routine then? The ultimate morning and evening routine to set your brain and your mind up for optimal performance and not getting brain fog?
Okay, I'll describe it as my routine. I generally get up somewhere between 5:30 and 7 in the morning, depending on when I went to sleep. So I get up, obviously I use the restroom, I drink some water. I do think that hydrating is very important.
Yes.
So I will drink some water. And then the fundamental layer of health is to set your circadian rhythm. The simplest way to do that is to go outside for 10 minutes and get some bright light in your eyes. I'll just list off some of the things that people always ask. What if you wake up before the sun rises? Well, simple rule, if you want to be awake, turn on as many bright lights in your house as possible, but then when the sun comes out, get outside and see some sunlight. You do not have to look directly into the sun, but you do want to get outside out of shade cover if you can. Don't wear sunglasses if you can do that safely. Don't try and do this through a window. Don't try and negotiate with me on this point. People
Go
are like,
outside.
what about a window? Well, the filtration of the important wavelengths of light through the window is just too high, and so it would take hours for you to set your circadian clock that way. And if you live in an area where it's very cloudy outside, just know that the sunlight, the photons coming through that cloud cover, are brighter than your brightest indoor lights. Now, if you live in a very dark region of the world, or it's unsafe or purely impractical to get outside in the morning, then it might make sense to get a sunrise simulator or one of these lights, but they tend to be very expensive. What I recommend people use instead is just a ring light, a ring blue light. This is a case where you can blast your system.
Wow.
So get that morning light. It sets a number of things in motion, such as your melatonin rhythm to happen 16 hours later to help you fall asleep. I would say this is the fundamental step of any good morning. And if you don't do this enough, you are messing yourself up in a number of ways. So then I come back inside, and then I do not drink caffeine right away. It's important in many ways to delay caffeine enough so that you can clear out some of the chemical signals in the brain and body that lead to a feeling of fatigue. So the longer you're awake, the more a molecule called adenosine builds up in your system. And when you sleep, you push that adenosine level back down. When you wake up in the morning, that adenosine level can be 0, but oftentimes there's still some hanging around. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It blocks adenosine function. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's effectively what it does. So if you wake up and you've got, this is arbitrary, but 20% of your adenosine still hasn't been cleared out, that's sort of a drowsiness that you woke up with. Then you go and you drink your coffee and you crush that ability of adenosine to have that effect, but it hasn't gone away. So that when your coffee wears off mid-morning, now that adenosine is there and you feel like there's a mid-morning crash or an afternoon crash. So I delay my caffeine intake for about 90 and ideally 120 minutes after I wake up, because in that way you bring your adenosine level down very, very low to 0, and then you don't get this rebound crash in the afternoon. And your system learns how to wake up naturally.
Right.
You get the natural cortisol and adrenaline.
Give it the time. Yeah.
Give it the time. And people hate this one because it's a little painful for the caffeine addicts, but I'm a pretty serious caffeine addict and I embrace that. And I'll tell you, it also makes the joy of the coffee so much greater.
Like waiting for that, you're savoring it, like, my first
it
sip.
tastes so much better.
Okay, so water, bright light, no caffeine until 90 to 20 minutes. What's next?
And
Water,
then
salt.
it's a question of whether or not I'm training that day or not. So I do believe everybody should be getting 120 to 150 and maybe even 150 to 180 minutes of so-called zone 2 cardio a week. This is the kind of cardiovascular exercise where you're doing work, you could have a conversation, but you're kind of at the threshold where it's not super easy to have a conversation. We're not talking sprints. There's just a myriad of effects on heart health, vascular health all over the body, gut microbiome, musculoskeletal stability, mental health, all these kinds of things. So I have a routine where I either weight train for an hour in the morning or I do a portion of that weekly cardio. And I just alternate, weight train one day, cardio the next, weight train. And then one day a week, I don't do anything. I don't do any exercise.
6 days a week you exercise.
Yeah, and I miss days. So, occasionally because of travel or other schedules or appointments, I might take 2 days off. Yes. I never go 7 days. I personally do well having a complete day off each week. But the hour of exercise generally is, 5-10 minutes of warm up and it's hard work.
Yeah.
And this is a new thing that we can get into when I talk about dopamine, but I do not allow myself to check social media, text message, phone calls, and lately not even music when I train for reasons that we can get into later. I'm really trying to get focused on what I'm doing, and I'm trying to extract the greatest amount of joy from the process in its purest form.
So no phone, essentially.
I try not to have the phone. Occasionally I'll use music or I'll listen to a podcast because it's such a great time to do that. So I don't want to say I never do, but most of the time I'm trying very hard to just do my exercise.
Yeah. Okay.
So I I try and exercise, or I do a 90-minute work bout. And if I exercise, then I would shower and do my 90-minute work bout, but sometimes I do the 90-minute work bout first. And that's generally when I'm starting to drink the caffeine. And the 90-minute work bout is a serious, non-negotiable time in which I don't allow myself to be on the internet. I'm not checking email. I'm not texting. My phone is off. And it's a process of learning to focus and learning to do what we call no-go functions in the brain. So we have an area of the brain called the basal ganglia that control go functions like reaching out for a pen, and no-go, which is resisting the urge to do something. And these are circuits that are very important for learning how to control attention and for controlling behavior. And so this 90-minute work bout is a kind of combined meditation, but also functional work for me. So for me, that could be writing, it could be planning a podcast, it could be reading. It's something that's kind of hard. And the thing to understand about this 90-minute work bout is that you should expect some friction early on. It's not like you just flip a switch and you're in. That it takes some time to get into this focus mode, and throughout that time, your brain will flicker in and out. And then, of course, it raises all these questions. Like people say, well, do you listen to music? Do you listen to white noise? There are a lot of tools and tricks. Sometimes music helps. Sometimes music hinders. Sometimes being in a cafe can help. Sometimes pure silence helps. It's really individual and it's really context dependent. So I don't want to give a prescriptive. But that 90-minute work bout, if I can do all those things and then get that 90-minute work bout, and then eat my lunch, I feel like that the system is set to make the rest of the day even better. Because we often hear about the perfect morning routine, but we're not thinking about how that routine influences the rest of the day's routine.
Yes.
And then we're about done with the morning, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I always, after lunch, do a 10 to 30 minute either non-sleep deep rest or hypnosis.
What does that do for you?
Well, what it does is that 20-minute naps or things of the sort that I just described, the hypnosis I described, allow the neuroplasticity that was triggered during that learning bout to occur much more quickly, and so people learn faster. And for some people, a nap isn't a feasible thing. Some people say, are naps good or bad? If your nap interferes with your nighttime sleep, it's bad. If your nap does not, then it's okay. And naps that are shorter than 90 minutes, so anywhere from 10, 20, 30, 45, but certainly not longer than 90 minutes, are going to be better than naps that are longer than 90 minutes for reasons related to sleep. So that kind of ends the morning. And then the rest of the day just depends on what's happening. And I think it's too varied to describe, but I do suggest that people try and get a little bit of sunlight as the sun is setting in the evening or late afternoon, depending on time of year and where you live. Same practice, because now you're sending two signals to that master circadian clock of when there's morning and when there's evening. And that clock has what we call a morning and an evening oscillator. So that if you can give more signals, then the system becomes more robust. It also ensures you a little bit against some of the exposure to nighttime bright light for reasons related to retinal sensitivity. So go outside for 10 or 15 minutes. Check, fine if you need to check your text messages, do it out front of your building or your home. That's going to be very good.
That's cool. Okay. That's the ultimate morning routine for you.
That's the ultimate morning routine for me.